why are you not maybe coaching something differently? Why are you coaching debating? So those are the things that I really, really experience. First level, not only as a coach to the kids, but also as a coach and like how my family sees me in most instances. So how I normally overcome this kind of barriers is just like explaining what debate has done for me.
Welcome everyone to the Shaft podcast. On this show, we take you on an immersive journey into the world of African debate. Today, I'm your host, Andrews, and we'll be having a discussion on the revolution of African debate in the line of WSDC debating. Over the years, we've seen several countries grow into WSDC development, making it a priority, and then developing debating talents for the African continent right from the high school stage. Today, we'll be having three guests who are also national team coaches of various national teams that are in a rebuilding project, a lot of them seeing massive progress and massive strides. The first person who joins us is Coach Mace, who is the WSDC coach from for Team Zimbabwe. Now, Team Zimbabwe has had an impressive run right from a few years back, and this year they were in Vietnam with a very impeccable performance. We'll be delving deep into their story and talk about what the process has been and some of the things that they are currently working on by way of still wanting to reach that aim. Joining us in the conversation, we also have Elisha, who is the team coach for Team Ghana, also in a very interesting rebuilding phase where they are still making massive strides in trying to groom debate talents right from the high school stage. They were also in Vietnam this year, would also discuss the various challenges, the various success stories that are being noticed in Ghana, and then we'll look at the ways in which we can, as a collective African institution or as a collective African debate space, help push a lot of these teams as well. The last person who will be joining us would be Coach Macharia, who is team coach, WSDC coach for Team Kenya. Now, he'll be joining us very soon, and once he joins, we'll do a much more detailed introduction on him. But Macharia was also present with Team Kenya in Vietnam, which also shows you the massive effort and dedication that a lot of these team coaches are putting in trying to develop the WSDC talent that we have in Africa. Just to kickstart this conversation, I would like to start with you, Mace. In about 4 or 5 minutes, tell us the journey of Zimbabwe towards this year's WSDC, because you made history there by being the furthest African team in the out rounds and putting up a very, very impressive performance that challenged a lot of big institutions who have had a rich history in WSDC. Now, this doesn't just pathway for Team Zimbabwe, but also gives massive, massive hope to a lot of African schools who see it as an impossible task trying to go into WSDC and trying to break the space. So I just want to have a general overview about what the journey of Team Zimbabwe this year looked like. What were the new things that were introduced? What were the lessons that were learned in previous years that affected your strategy in approaching WSDC this year? And how your team and you yourself feel about the kind of results that you've achieved in Vietnam this year.
Okay. I don't know where to start, honestly, because yeah, there's quite a number of things. What I'll just like emphasize on is, when people see like just the results, they just like look at the results. They don't
Yeah.
look at the actual journey. For us, I think this whole thing started in 2020. Mexico WSDC. It was a learning process for all of us, and that was the time where our organization was taking over from the previous organization as the national coaches. So we were rather clueless, but I think from that time, that's when we started like learning a lot of things from WSDC. And that growth really allowed us to then grow up to where we are this year. So if
Yeah.
I'm looking at the team for this year specifically, um, what we looked at mostly was on what was missing, or what is missing from other debaters in the clubhouse stage, and we try to implement that. So, for example, I think our team at WSDC was known for their style, which is what we were really focusing on, just like to make sure we develop like them to be stylistic speakers. Because the moment you're a stylistic speaker at WSDC, it means you have a higher ability for you to then impact your arguments more, because the way in which you speak can enhance your arguments, and it can make your arguments like sound smart in most instances. So
Yeah.
that was one of the strategies that we actually used, just to train the speakers more on style. But the other thing I would just like to emphasize on is just like the commitment that speakers had. Because previously, obviously, when they look at the performance from the previous teams, like in 2020, starting off like with little to no wins, I think like we had like 3 wins in 2020, and like moving on to 2021, teams like performing better 2022, up to breaking at WSDC for the very first time. So it was like more of like the speakers themselves saying, okay, we won this, we have done it before, we just like have to make sure we provide ourselves like a strategic positioning that allows us then to be over other teams. So I genuinely think with the amount of work that the speakers and the coaches were putting in this year, the results were not as shocking, because they really worked very hard. And like,
Yeah.
you know how difficult it is for speakers, like they were all like in their final year of high school, trying to focus on their academics at the same time, trying to focus on debating, and like, if those who know me, they know that my coaching sessions don't last 1 hour like other coaches. So we spend like 3-4 hours over a Discord call, and like the next day, like they're going to school. So it was really, really like intense training, to a point that like they feel like they're worn out. So it was really so much in terms of like the pressure that I had. So with the results, they did great, and they were very happy as well. I think it like really, really paid off. Yeah. So that's pretty much like the summary of the journey with the team.
Okay. Just before I move on to Elisha at this point, so I had two key things picked up from the things that you just said, and one of them is about developing a team identity. So trying to build on the style of your speakers, because that's what your team was being identified with. I just want to ask a much more general question here. A lot of the time we see this in other sports. So for instance, you look at football and there's always a conversation about the identity of a team. How does this team historically play like? And even now, how do they play like? You expect a particular strategy from the team. We barely apply that to the debate world, because we, especially if you look at university debating and BP debating, is more like people just do what gets them results at every point in time. And people will tell you having a standard style or a standard identity is probably not the best. How do you reconcile building a very predictable team identity with trying to have surprise elements that still give you the results that you want in rounds? Because you wouldn't want to be giving away a lot of what people would be expecting from you, such that you would still have certain surprise elements to get the kind of results within the rounds.
Yeah, I think like with style, mostly it's because style is different. So
Okay.
obviously, when we are training speaker style, we don't train them to speak the same. We just train them to be stylistic. So we just tell them, instead of like using this kind of terms, try to use terms that probably can describe your arguments this way. Instead of like speaking this way, maybe try to speak in a way that probably will make people like take you seriously, for example. So then speakers can then derive their own style from there. So we
Okay.
just like have that criteria to say you just need to be stylistic. How you put your own style is up to you as a speaker. That way we don't create robot speakers that speak like their coaches. So we just like to have speakers being stylistic, but they have their own way on developing their own style. So I genuinely think, though, even if they know that Team Z might be stylistic, they won't have like the same expectation to say all the speakers will like speak the same. So I think that's one of the ways on like how they won't really predict much in terms of like how they're going to be speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know that you prioritize a particular skill, but then you still give room for people to have their unique individual identities within that skill set. So Let me just move on to Elisha at this point. Elisha, you were also in Vietnam, and you also had your team participating. You also had a journey building up to Vietnam. I just want to hear your aspect. What was the process like? What has the journey been for Team Ghana? What were the priorities? What were the targets? And how was the experience in Vietnam? And what were your takeaways from that experience as well?
Thank you very much. Really happy to be on this podcast and excited to be on the podcast with Mace and Macharia. Congratulations to Zimbabwe again for the amazing work that they did in Vietnam. So our situation has been a bit interesting. I work with a group of people under the broad group called Speech Forces that does a lot of debate-related stuff in Ghana. We are the same organization that runs about 3 tournaments: Genesis, Easter's Cup, Accra Open at the university level. And over the years, you've seen the university level stabilize in terms of competition, in terms of growth. As you can see from like Ghanaian teams doing pretty well in the space, both on the African continent and then at the global stage. So Eric, who's the founder of Speech Forces, has been working with me, and we've been trying to start a high school circuit, which is going to then feed into the university stream, or beyond that, just create a generation of critical thinkers and people who are being educated and trained through debate. The reason why our situation is a bit interesting is because of the academic calendar in Ghana post-COVID and how that has affected things. But before we get to that, so prior to the COVID era, Ghana had not been able to attend WSDC. So in 2017, we had some internal high school competitions which I participated in because I was in high school. I was selected for 2018 WSDC, but we couldn't go because of visa issues. And so for a while, the Ghanaian World Schools program was a bit shaky. But then COVID hit, and then we attended 2 of the 3 online World Schools competitions. So as we realized that World Schools would be coming back in person, we started recruitment pretty early. Like, at least we thought we were starting early at that point. Once again, remember, we hadn't done this in a while. So this was a bit new to us, even though it wasn't completely new. And when we did the recruitment, with a blindfold. The blindfold was that we were doing the recruitment without knowledge of when final exams was going to take place for final year students in high school. So what we did to save ourselves was to select some final year students and select some second year and first year students, right? But under normal circumstances, you're usually using the final year students as your main Ghanaian, like your main team or your team A some of the times, and then maybe you have like a few second years in there. So unfortunately for us, I think like 6 months or so before Worlds, we realized that there was no way the final years were going to participate, because at the time when Worlds was going to be happening is exactly like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on what course they were reading from their final exams. Parents were not going to allow that, whatnot. So then we have to formulate a set of second years and try and get them ready for Worlds. But once again, for the second years, some of them are like reading different kind of courses. So we had like one of our speakers who joined the team literally a month before the competition, right? So it was a bit like chaotic for us for this particular year because of the academic calendar and the unforeseen circumstances that were not really up to us. But nonetheless, we went to Vietnam, and it was an amazing experience. I like the way that Mace says, like, he realized that style was one of the main things, and that was something that they had to work on. We did recognize that was like definitely one of the main things, especially I think for African speakers. It's something that we don't usually have naturally, because a lot of people are not as exposed as like their mates in other parts of the world would be exposed. So your mates in other parts of the world, like, I've probably had certain conversations at a very young age, which would be a taboo depending on where you grow up in Africa, or it's just like something you don't talk about often, depending on where you grow up in Africa. So all of those things are things that we realized. We realized the kids had to learn a lot of new things. And considering the amount of work and the chaos, as I explained before, that we had because of like all of these timelines going haywire, I think we did an okay job.
Yeah.
But I definitely think we should have done way better, or we could have done way better. But it's a good start for us. And I'm really excited about the fact that the high school program in Ghana is back and it's in full force, because all that I have done in debating, I owe to the high school like work that Speech Forces did and other seniors in University of Ghana were doing for my high school, right? So it's extremely
Yeah.
important for me on the personal level, and I think it's extremely important for us as a circuit on the African continent, and especially Ghana, that has seen a lot of like growth in the university level, to find a way to sustain that growth by building a very good high school system. So I'll say that this is a start, definitely not the end, and there are glass ceilings that we need to break, and we are definitely working towards them.
Awesome. Just to put this into perspective, I'll ask Mace the same question in a short while. But for Ghana, I know prior to Speech Forces establishing a major WSDC program or a focus on high school debating, there was probably none or no major high school debating program that is aimed at grooming students to participate in WSDC. I know Mace just highlighted that prior to Royalty Pact taking over Zimbabwe's training, there was an organization that was handling Zimbabwe, but they still found themselves in a position where they had to learn and go through a learning phase. How much of a learning phase have your team at Speech Forces had to go through, and what impact have that had? Because I'm just presuming if you had an institution that was prior to you handling WSDC focused on this, maybe there were some insights, maybe there were some processes, maybe there were some accesses that you would have had that would have made the entire process or journey easier for you.
That's an amazing question, and I think that that's one of the things that has been a bit interesting for us. I remember in Vietnam, something would happen, and I'll text Eric, my other colleague, or sometimes I'd even text you and be like, "Oh my God, I didn't see this coming. We need to do something about this for next year." I think what has happened is, yes, we are doing some of these things like without much knowledge from the Ghanaian context. But the good thing about the African space, and I'm not saying this because Mace is on, but like I know Eric can pick a phone and call Mace anytime. I even had like this call at 1 a.m. my time with Mace one evening, and I'm like, "Yo, dude, like, what are you guys doing with the Zim team? What's going on?" I equally have those calls with Macharia, and I think that really, really helps. So like, there's some sort of support coming from various parts of the continent, regardless of what team like you are coaching, which really, really helps. But for things that we are learning, like, it's very interesting that you would think some things are a foregone conclusion, but they are not. I don't know if Mace has ever gone through this, but for example, simple things like kids showing up at training can be very interesting, because sometimes parents don't see the point, or parents feel like kids are training too much and the kids need some rest, or maybe like they have to choose between things like church, right? And this is not about our team for WSDC, but this is about like training kids generally, because you have a large group. You would want to train a kid one day and then the parents would be like, "Oh, we have church." And I'm like, "No, we are 1 week away from a competition. We can go to church after the competition." But the parents don't get it, right? Like, all of these things are things that could probably be solved if like you had a strong laid out calendar prior to selecting the person, to the extent that when the person is being selected and is signing on the dotted line of the consent form to be part of the team, they've already agreed and consented to all of those training sessions, which then kind of makes it mandatory for them, right? But all of these things are things that we figured out in the middle of the training session. You're like, "Oh my gosh, like, maybe this person isn't showing up, and it's even not the person, sometimes it's the parents." So these are all things that like we've had to learn the hard way. And as I said, like, I've been relying on information from other countries, like Mace, Zimbabwe, to know what to do. But the other thing that I've also started doing is that at Vietnam, I just went around talking to coaches and team managers, and I'm like, hi, how do you do this? How do you do that? Trying to form like good relationships that allow me to ask questions if I see someone do something great in the future. I think it's like the same way the university circuit in Ghana was grown, which included a lot of like consultancy in terms of like speaking to people who had done it before and trying to just understand how they got to do it on the world stage. Is a similar approach that we are taking. So we're not assuming we know everything, we're going to figure everything out. And we also don't have the time to figure everything out if other people have figured it out. Like, if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of thing. So that's what we are doing. So many lessons learned. You have absolutely no idea how, like, sometimes I get so frustrated that something that probably should have been so apparent to me wasn't apparent to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But definitely, all of those things are things that we've noted down. And like, for example, quick one, our recruitment process this year is very, very, very rigid. Not rigid to the point where we are not going to get anyone, but rigid to the point where we are going to hopefully get people that we are absolutely sure have a higher amount of commitment, which would then mean that like our existing WSDC team that is capable of going to WSDC next year would have a very competitive pool to debate with, which doesn't make them feel comfortable, which doesn't make them feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to WSDC anyway and I don't have to do so much. And I think those are things that are like based on the lessons that we've learned. And I'm really excited that we've learned those lessons. It's making me feel like I'm growing as a coach, as someone who's managing like the team. And yeah, it's an amazing experience.
Awesome. You highlighted something, and I'll push it on to Mace right now. There is a significant difference between WSDC and university debating, specifically when it comes to parental influence. A lot of the individuals you'll be dealing with at the university level would most of the time not have to subscribe to a higher level of parental scrutiny or influence, especially when it comes to commitment to training, showing up, maybe for in-person competitions where they have to travel. But for a lot of the development stages, you can do that by simply getting the individuals committed without necessarily having to go through parents. Now, Elisha just highlighted how significant parental influence is for getting WSDC training. And especially for the African context, there is this lack thereof of appreciation for the importance of debating in the vast majority of instances, where you see a lot of parents questioning, why should my kid be spending 3 hours on a Discord call or on a Zoom call training when they could go and sit behind their books, or when I could send them to do something, or even when they could sleep, right? So how challenging has that been navigating those waters for Zimbabwe? And what are some of the strategies you had to put in place to try and get parents getting to understand the value of what their kids are doing, and also throwing their support for these kids when they need certain things to then go through the developmental process?
Yeah, I think it's the same with Elisha, honestly. Like, we have had conversations with parents where parents will be like, okay, I think like you guys spend a lot of time on training. Can maybe they train once a week and like focus maybe on the books? And like, that's not practical. If we want to go and perform, because it's not about us just going there to be present, it's us going there to put in the work and also perform like teams. And given like the nature of African debating, we are always like maybe 3 steps behind than everyone else, not because we can't make it, but because we are not just fighting teams, we are fighting against like a lot of like barriers that limit you from winning a round. I always give an example when I'm coaching kids. I'm like, look guys, in a round where you guys are facing like, let's say, USA or Canada, it's easier for judges to defend why Zimbabwe lost over Canada than to defend why Canada lost. So you need to put in 3 times the work so that like the judges can give you a win and it's clear. So having that conversation with the parents, I'm like, yeah, look, I do understand where you're coming from, but for us, the parents have been supportive to some degree, because the moment you have a chat with them and just like explain to them like your child is not going to be affected in terms of like their academic performance, because their main worry is like, if my child is spending this time on debating, how are they going to perform? Because we have like a track record of debaters that have done debate at high school before and they have been performing very well. And like I always start with myself. I did a lot of high school debating
Yeah.
when I was in high school. I have friends of mine that also have done like a lot of like high school debating, and I have students that I've been coaching before the national team itself. So when I finished high school, I was coaching like through the Royal Pact, and we have had students doing very well. So we train like maybe 3-4 times a week, and all those students have done well in their academics. They've managed to get scholarships through national team as well. From 2020, we have like a lot of students are in Canada right now, in the summer in the US through scholarships. So I would just tell parents like, look, these are the students that you have coached before. These are the students that you have gone even like at a higher intense training than we are having this year. They've done 7 days a week training, 3 hours every day of
Yeah.
training. And what we're asking from you right now is just like to allow your child to attend like maybe 3 days of the week or 2 days of the week, not that much really. That conversation is much meaningful to parents, just like to give them reassurance that we have had people before that have undergone the same training, but they have been like really, really successful in their academics. And also telling them about like, if your child is not able to be part of the team, it affects them as well when they come to their college applications. I'm not really sure if it's the same with other African countries, but mostly with Zim parents, they always prioritize giving their students going abroad for universities. So in those instances, they want the child to have like a strong application for them to get a scholarship. And the only way they can do that is like when they have a strong curricula that they do have. And debating contributes much. So when when you have conversations with parents and tell them like the importance of it, then they become like cool and say, okay, as long as you can reassure me that they are not going to be affected. And like it sounds very funny though, but if I just tell you like in 2021, I even had to have chemistry classes from my debate academy because there was a parent who was like, my child is failing chemistry. And I was like,
Wow.
as someone who did chemistry, I'm going to teach a child chemistry. So I had to take that step further and say, your child is very talented. I can't let them drop debating just because they're failing chemistry when I can do something about it. And like the child did very well, both in debating and in chemistry as well. So yeah, it's been challenging, but we have measures in place. Really, we can communicate with parents and then just let them chill a bit.
Yeah, this is interesting, especially when you are not just showing the fact that students can do both debating and perform in academics, but also trying to put debating as a pathway to getting the kind of college experience that a lot of kids want to get, and the kind of knowing that parents have those things in their mind when they care about their kids schooling abroad or getting very, very good scholarships and needing to build a very good CV or curriculum. That's really interesting. Just to ask this though, I'm wondering how much of a challenge has it been trying to navigate the cultural aspect? Because a lot of the time, beyond parents feeling that debating is not such a good use of their time, they don't just find value in it. So why should my kid be doing debating rather than maybe doing some other kind of sport or doing some other extracurricular activity? Why specifically debating? And this is mainly because even from a personal point of view, I struggle to always convince people within my family how important debate is. A lot of them just don't get it, right? And this is very significant from an African background, trying to understand why debate is relevant. What are the skills? Why do you need these skills? And especially when parents look at this from a perspective of kids objecting to them. Like these kids who do debating tend to be loud, tend to want to object to things, and parents want to protect that kind of influence, that kind of power that they have. How significant has that been trying to navigate the cultural waters of Africa in terms of initiating debate at the high school level?
What I can say is I think I've had such conversations before about like debaters it just as individuals that are just loud. And I'm like, no, I think the way in which people have like maybe like the perspective they have about debaters is wrong. they are not just like loud individuals. These are the people that probably will help you in instances where you just like need something, like let's say, yeah, something like that requires, like let's say you want to, I don't know, focus on like the most important aspects of life that require critical thinking. Your child is a debater. They are there to help you. They are not there to fight you. So I think the most like impactful thing that I've heard, I've heard that those conversations with parents, I'm like, why should my child do debating? Why can't they do something else? Why can't they do
Yeah.
public speaking? Why can't they do soccer? Why can't they do those kind of aspects? Why should they be arguing all the time? And I think even myself, I've had that part, like where like my family asked me like, why do you focus much more on debating? I do understand like, yeah, why are you not maybe coaching something differently? Why are you coaching debating? So those are the things
Yeah.
that I really experience. First level, not only as a coach to the kids, but also as a coach and like how my family sees me in most instances. So how I normally overcome this kind of barriers is just like explaining what debate has done for me as an individual. So I will tell them like, for like when I was in high school, I wasn't like that of a smart kid, like to say I do well a lot in academics. But when you are a debater, in most instances, when you don't know the answer, like you are writing an essay and you don't know the answer, you use your debate skill to craft something and then you come up with the answer. And this also
Yeah.
helps college applications. So if you're applying
Okay.
for college, yeah, those certain questions that probably you don't even know how to respond. But if you're a debater, oftentimes you come up with something that helps you as well. If you're writing, so I always tell parents the same thing as well, to say if your child probably wants to go, like let's say to America, they have to write SATs. Debating helps like craft the skill that helps them with SATs. Yeah. So it's not always about like, yeah, debating just for fun and debating just to go for world championships and do those kind of things, but it's about what it contributes in terms of like life skills. Like going for an interview, debaters like have a probably like 95% success rate at interviews more than like non-debaters. So it's really helpful, like, you know, in different kinds of aspects. So trying to have conversation with parents, explaining to them, it's difficult if you don't have real world examples of where those things have been
Yeah.
happening. But when they look at me, because some parents like they just like say, okay, just you as a coach, what have you done? So I'll just like
Yeah.
give them like, that kind of a background about myself. So this is where I started with my debating. This is how I've advanced. And like I've never gone for a job interview and I don't get a job. Every time I
Yeah.
go for an interview, I get a job. When I applied for universities, I got admitted in almost all the universities I applied for. So giving them that kind of a platform as well, like knowing that when their child follows the same path and like the child can have like those skills, you know, it makes them like cool a bit. Some parents though, they want fully like really lay off their child, but
Yeah.
they still want the child to do it, but they're still like reserved, you know, they
Yeah.
still want the kind of like reassurance because, you know, I normally have like I normally talk with parents mostly. So when I recruit a team, I always say your parents should contact me. So I contact parents through emails and through WhatsApp, and most of the parents become like, we just built that like that rapport through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So we just have that those conversations, like they don't happen like on a formal spectrum, but it just happens informally, just like through WhatsApp. Like you just get a text, oh hey coach, I wanted to ask about this, you know,
Yeah.
think it's okay for my child to do this? Do you think it's fine for them to do this? Those kind of questions, you know. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
okay, I have to find the best way that can like reassure the parent that like the child is in the safe hands, the child is in the right pathway. So I always have those questions, to be honest. But yeah, it's challenging, but it's always like as a coach, you just put yourself in that position of like, I need to find a way on how these parents can believe in their child, you know, like that they
Yeah.
can like use these skills like in real life. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll now introduce another voice which we've all been waiting to hear into this conversation. So we have Coach Macharia with us now, and he will be joining us. Hello, Coach Macharia. You are welcome to the Shaft podcast. How are you doing today, and how is Tanzania treating you?
Thank you so much. Actually, we've just come from a tournament that just ended. So sorry for being late. We were on our way home. The
Yeah.
tournament is going well, and Tanzania is treating us very, very well. We have a lot of kids from like 7 countries here. So it's a nice Pan-African schools debate festival going on right now.
Awesome. The last time I was in Tanzania was in 2018 for PADC. It's been long. It's been several years since I went there. So I don't know if a lot has changed though, but I'm glad to know that Tanzania is still buzzing and amazing.
It's still the same vibes, same heat. And we're actually staying in the same hotels we were staying in 2018. So much has changed since we were last here in 2018.
Memories. The hot sun would greet you anytime you step out of your room. So you'd always remember those experiences. I mean, joining us, we'll just want to hear a little bit about Kenya's journey to Vietnam WSDC this year. I read very amazing episodes on your WhatsApp status. I would really love to hear a lot more of that juice now, but just tell us in a summary, how has the experience been coaching a team, preparing ahead for WSDC? What were your challenges? How did you get over them? And what was the overall experience at Vietnam?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think our journey was very difficult. And I think one of the things I like to joke about is, to be fair, maybe just to call out or to shout out another great African debater, Chantel. Chantel is really behind going to Vietnam, because in April I had given up. I think Mace and Elisha know. I was keeping on asking them about, have you paid reg fees? It was like, deadline is 15 days from now. We've not done it. And I knew for sure we're not going to be able to do it. But Chantel kept saying, let's keep the faith. And so the summary of that is that it was a journey of faith. We never knew we would make it, but for some reason, we ended up in Vietnam, and I think we had a great experience. In terms of the challenges of African teams are largely similar. Number one, we don't have enough money to fund this. So what ends up happening, you end up taking the kids that can afford it rather than the kids that are the best. So that ends up affecting us too. Many of the parents do not understand the value of debating to their child. So then when it comes to training schedules, they don't understand why they're spending 2 hours, 3 hours in debate training rather than reading for their final exams. And then the other challenge that we found was quite big for from our perspective is, as a new nation or nation that is attending WSDC for the first time physically, many of these kids don't understand what it means to be in a national debate team. So they think it's like anything else they do. So in terms of getting kids to buy into the idea of debating, like it's a sport, you train, you read, you practice. It took a while to be able to work around that. And I think we managed to overcome most of these challenges, but I can't say that it was an easy ride. Those are some of the main issues I think that Team Kenya really faced. And also, we do all this work in like volunteers, so nobody pays us, no one gives us anything. So also keeping our own motivation to just keep doing this is really hard. So yeah, that was a summary of some of the challenges, but the experience was amazing. That was the last part of your question. I can say that I have nothing to compare it to, but it was a great experience for us being the first time physically at WSDC. I mean, the hosts were very welcoming and hospitable. The vibes were great. The people were very nice. And I think the kids ended up having fun, and we ended up having fun. Of course, there's a lot to learn, and we hope to do better.
Yeah. I mean, we've discussed some of these issues, but there are quite unique ones that you've highlighted, and I would like us to delve a little bit deeper into it. And one interesting one is the significant impact that lack of funding is having, not just on the process, but also on the quality of team that you then have to take to these competitions. Because now you are limited, you are not able to select your best brains, you are now having to select people who can afford it because you are significantly limited with funding. Now, more like this, is this a cyclical problem? Because I see this going a long way to affect your performances at these competitions, and then these performances, if they are not that great, equally making it more difficult to access funding, feeding back into the exact same problem of always sending people who can afford it. And so if this kind of challenge is there, I just want to pick up a few ideas from each and every one of the coaches that are here. How do you think that Africa can start navigating our way through funding for debates, specifically at the high school level, because this is becoming a significant problem in putting out the kind of quality that we want to put out there. And like Mace would say, we are facing so many more limitations to accessing good results, such that we cannot be having situations where we are not putting our best foot forward, because then we just make it much more easier to get the negative results rather than the positive ones.
I mean, I can start this. I have come to the conclusion that I think we have to shift the way we look at fundraising. I think the African way has always been, let's go ask NGOs to sponsor us, and then they'll give us $10,000, and then we'll go to WSDC. And if that doesn't happen, we're not going. I think we have to become a bit more ingenious than that. We have to become smarter. We have to be more creative with our fundraising methods. I think some of the experiences we've had this year that I think have helped us a lot is, number one, you have to avoid the whole bulk trying to look for one sponsor to get you. You can look for multiple different sponsors to give you small sponsorships that can help you. Number two, you have to develop sustainably, which looks like, I think, trying to get revenue sources to your national team. I like to think about it, and I think I've never told him, like, I was in WSDC, and Team Zimbabwe had very cool merchandise, and I was like, if Mace sold 100 hoodies for like to kids at like $10 each, that's $1,000. They can be able to do something. So we must be creative in the way we start looking for fundraising. Crowdfunding is also very effective, especially in an African context, when people know they're supporting other people. We generally like to share. So many African teams don't crowdfund. It looks like sending out a GoFundMe and say, like you've done it, Andrews, when you were going to Worlds, and you saw how many people just end up giving you something. So we have to be aggressive, and we have to be creative in the ways we try to raise money. This thing of waiting for NGOs, I think Africans and debate in Africa is very NGO dependent. So you just have to like get creative, do a tournament, raise money through Reg, be creative. And I think if we can do that, we're able to be more sustainable, to build our teams much better. I think that has to be what we do.
Yeah, I'll come back right to you on another issue that you highlighted. But Elisha, I'm sure you've also had these conversations about fundraising. And I'm sure you've also had to face the harsh reality of selecting your best minds versus selecting people who can afford it. How sharp is this a problem in the Ghanaian context? And like Macharia said, do you also think we need to start rethinking fundraising, and what are some of these ideas that you would share? Because I'm sure there are a lot more African coaches for WSDC teams who are equally facing some of these similar problems, and some of these solutions will go a long way to just ignite various ideas within their mind, where they can also try to find sustainable means of financing a lot of these African schools.
So I come from a background of debating where I have lived the absence of funding so vividly, like to the extent that my own university is not really forthcoming with funding since I came in. So like my university was probably the most well-funded in West Africa since 2014, 2015, we're the first to go to Worlds, etc. Then I come into the university and the school's like, oh, we kind of don't have money, etc. We are broke. So I know how it feels like, and I know like how painful it can get. But I am trying to find a way to deal with the dilemma. So Macharia says sometimes there's a conversation of your best minds may not always have the money to fund themselves. And then there are people that could fund themselves, not that they are bad, but they may not be the absolute best. I've had this conversation with Eric, and I've also had this conversation with you over a Zoom call, that maybe we need to rethink how we probably go around with some of the things like recruitment, and see if there's a world where we can find best minds that can pay for themselves to begin with, so that we, from the onset, have a good foundation. So, of course, the most sustainable way is not that you want people to consistently pay for themselves, but even if you intend to find sponsorship, you're still looking for people that you can fall back on if maybe there's like $1,000 more to be paid, or there's still like some things that need to be done. Because Zimbabwe's match that Macharia was talking about is really cool, but they still need money to do those things. So you may get the funding for the ticket, but you may still want to get funding from these kids for like things like match, etc. So for me right now, like I'm thinking of ways that we can find people that are really, really good and have some like capital to begin with, while we still work on ways to fund the group in a way that if we find people that are also really, really good who don't have the money, we can put them in the team with the other people that are good that have the money, so that we can like have a good spread and we can still have a sustainable team. Because of course, like I think the plan is to get to a point where you get selected into the team, and we can assure you that wherever else is happening next, we are going to have money to take you. But we have structural issues here. As Macharia was saying, you can't get a large amount of sponsorship from one company. For us, we attended 2 competitions outside of Africa this year, one in the US and one in Vietnam. For the US one, we were talking to airlines for so long. Every time we thought we had hope with getting discounts, the hope would be dashed. And like, I was always confused because 2 weeks before, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to mention any brands, but this brand is going to give us a discount. And a couple of weeks later, they're like, oh, we spoke to our headquarters in whatever other country, and they said that discount is not possible. So that's what I'm looking at. And I'm thinking that like, as time goes on, as we have more results, because African society is a bit result oriented, and as we've already discussed to an extent, may not understand the full impact of debating until they see some tangible things, right? So it may mean that you have to start getting a set of alumni that are doing extremely well in various fields. I mean, they could then become people that sponsor. But beyond that, if you can point to success stories, if you can point to success stories out of debating, people that are doing well, people that have gotten scholarships, if you can point to success in the debating world, we broke records, we broke at worlds, we made quarterfinals, semifinals, maybe that would then bring the funding, which means that like there's a whole 2 to 3 years, 4 years of building in a place that looks like a desert, like a dry land, with very little funding coming from external sources. And I think like it's a difficult thing to deal with, but we need to keep like soldiering on. So if it means that you may not be able to get people that don't have the money on the team, then maybe get the people that have the money on the team early and try and train them and try to get them in shape to at least do considerably well. Like that's how I've been thinking about it, and that's how I'm looking to shape like the Ghanaian team with the team that we have, like the administration that we have, and how we intend to go until that recognition comes and until that funding is easily accessible.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a great suggestion, because I'm sure these ideas from Macharia are equally great. But of course, regardless of the amount of funding, if you can equally get some very, very brilliant minds who can fund themselves, that also allows you to have more disposable income to even fund more other people who can equally attend these competitions. But I've seen this in my experience as more like a canker that eats up a lot of aspirations in debate. That if there's a team that's struggling to raise funds, that team ends up having to pay way more in the future to attend that same competition. So for instance, if you're a team that has to wait for so long to then access funding, probably means you are booking flights very, very late, and equally means you are booking flights at probably a ridiculously high expense over teams that have access to funding and are able to book flights way earlier. And some of these things are equally draining out even the amount of money that you're able to save to reinvest into future rebuilding projects and future developmental projects. For you, Mace, I think Macharia has highlighted to some of the strategies that you are putting in place, but also what has been your experience since 2020 with funding for WSDC, and specifically for this year where you had to go for in-person. What were some of the challenges? How did you try to go around them? And if you still faced some of these things, even in the long run, how are you now trying to think up ways to escape those challenges in the future for upcoming WSDCs?
Yeah, I think the challenges are similar to what Elisha and Macharia already said. I think like because for us when we started in 2020, 2020 was just like an entry level. So we just like, okay, let's focus more on public schools because they have like less access to debating. So and that time it was online, so we didn't really care much. Just like that entry. And then we realized like most teams in 2020, even though it was online, most teams were debating together. So like they would camp, wherever, and then so that needed money. So in 2021, we changed the strategy. So we're focusing on people that can probably fund themselves for us to have a camp. So we did get some like private school kids, and they were able to put in money together and then go for the like camp. But the problem which we had is like now you have a call out from the government schools saying why I'm only focusing on private schools, those kind of things. So it just becomes like very, very difficult. So the thing sometimes you want money to do something, even the people that can't afford to pay, they also want to be included. So like this has been a huge challenge. Lucky enough though, in 2022, we then secured our first sponsorship with Magic University. And they were able to fund the team to go and camp in South Africa. So they paid literally for almost everything: their flight tickets, their make and their food, their accommodation. In South Africa. So the debate was online, but the team was able to go to South Africa and stay there for like 20 days through a funded trip by Medic University. So this was like one of the ways on how we managed to then incorporate both private school kids and like public school kids together. In 2023, however, then we had another challenge because one, we put our application for funding with Medoc very, very late. And the person who was in charge of like the African sponsorship was on leave, and like there was no one to take over. And then he's trying to say, okay, go and email this person, they're going to be able to help you. But it really takes time for them to respond like to those emails because like they have a lot of funding that they have to deal with on other people that really want the funding. So that it became very challenging on our end. And because the way in which we're selecting our team was to say we focus on like having a balance. So instead of like just like say we have this group of private school kids, we also have to have a certain group of like the public school students as well. And in most instances, private school kids, they can still manage to fund for their own trips. Like most of the parents, they have good relations with the companies that they work for, and the companies can sponsor their students, the students of like the parents as well to attend. So like that was not a problem. The problem now that we had was with the public school students, which was very difficult. And as a coach, I'm like, these are my best speakers, and I can't compromise them not going. So I have to find a way on how I will still make them go. Parents told me face up, like, we don't need that money, we can't afford it. We have tried sponsorships and we don't really have it. So if you guys can't get sponsorship, then my child is not going. So it came to a point where some of the time, like I had to find like 2 speakers. I was like, okay, that's fine. These speakers have been with me for like 3 years now, and I can't just like drop them last minute. So it's just a way of like you're trying to find a way and compromise like that situation. So it's not like now what we have done as an organization is like if we're selecting like they say going for WSDC with 4 speakers, for example, if we can get 2 speakers that can fund themselves fully, great. And then it means we're only looking for funding for 2 speakers. And also if like those 2 speakers are great speakers, then we can find ways on how we can like fundraise for them. I think it's easier to fundraise for lesser speakers than it is to fundraise for the whole team. So it's been really, really a huge challenge. And also having like coaches, and like I think Macharia also explained that coaches are not paid for these. Do like voluntary work. So coaches also can't pay for their own trip. So in most instances, what we do is like we need to have like parents funding coaches through their students. So if now you have like parents that can't afford, then it just becomes very, very difficult. It came to a point where, and like this is very funny though. So with WSDC 2023 here, so what we do is like when the Ocom give us like registration fees and say reg fee per person is 350, what we do is we multiply the reg fee by the number of people that are going. So because we add coaches on the reg fee, and then you divide. So if the division is $500, for example. Like, let's say 4 speakers, 3 coaches. So if 350 times 7 divided by that, and then you divide by 4 speakers that are going, so like you can charge like the parents the certain amount, because they have to at least fund coaches. One of the parents directly instead of emailing us to ask the questions, directly email WSDC and ask, how much is registration fee for WSDC this year?
Wow.
And then WSDC responded and said, "Oh, the registration fee is $350, but you can never get it. Contact the Team Zimbabwe," and then they like sit us in that conversation. So I had a chat with the parent, and like, "Oh yeah, we wanted to check about the registration fee." I'm like, "Yeah, the registration fee is $350, but because for us the thing is we always have transparency. We always write those things on the letters and tell the parents that parents have to fund coaches. The reason being is that parents don't pay coaches, so we spend like about 9 months of training. These people are coaching for free. The least that we can do is divide the cost that the coaches are facing by the number of students that are traveling. And the parents were really understanding. So those that were able to pay, they were really understanding and saying, okay, we are still going to be able to assist those kind of things. So I'm unsure really on how best we can improve in terms of like getting like more funding, but one of the easiest ways is just partnering with universities. I know South Africa did like sometime they partnered with Minerva, and we partnered with Mace. I think it's easier with universities because they understand the value of debating as opposed to NGOs. For us, I'm not really sure about other countries. I think it might be different, but for Zimbabwe, it's very difficult to get sponsorship from like NGOs. Like literally, like you have to sell your soul out. We have really tried that out. It still doesn't really work. They ask a lot of questions. And what's funny is they only fund you when you have done something. And like let's say you've done like won a championship. Then like, you want this, and then they can give you that money. I'm like, but we needed the money to go there.
Exactly.
So why? So I think it happened with like the Moodcourt team, because Zim Moodcourt team, when like they won the world championships last year, when they came back, they were getting all kind of sponsorship and all funding for nothing, because now they didn't really need that money. They needed the money to go, and they had to find ways on fundraising to go to the tournament. So I genuinely think it's very difficult to just get funding without like probably doing something. I'm not really sure if it's going to be way easier, but for Team Zimbabwe, we'll try to use what Elisha and Macharia suggested. I think some of the strategies we didn't employ them more, so we'll try and like use those. I don't know if it will really help out, but the issue of funding it's not just like it's not just like other African things. I think it's like a huge African when it comes to funding, and it's really difficult. Like sometimes when having a chat with other coaches, they'll be like, "Why are guys doing fundraising? Why can't you get funding from this kind of organization?" I'm like, that's not easy. Because someone even suggested it, like, just apply for funding from this organization. Like, they probably will give you the money. I'm like, for you guys, maybe they will give you, but for us, we have tried, so it's not bad.
Sure. Just before I switch on to Macharia, we also saw these chilling clips when Team Zimbabwe won a lot of people's hearts at Vietnam WSDC. And then anytime Zimbabwe was mentioned, whether at breaks, whether at closing ceremony, you had almost every single person chanting Team Zimbabwe, Team Zimbabwe. When you heard it, how did it make you feel? Just a side note.